Interesting. Very interesting. Oh, look at his face. Just look at his face. Pulled down by Bergkamp. Oh, what a goal! Dennis Bergkamp.
There was a time when football felt different. Families gathered around one television. The kettle was boiling. Children sat on the carpet. Grandfathers knew every player. And before the match began, a familiar voice welcomed millions into another unforgettable afternoon, calm, measured, never louder than the game itself. For an entire generation, that voice became part of football. It carried supporters through World Cups, FA Cup finals, European nights, moments of glory, and football's darkest tragedies. That voice belonged to Barry Davies. For more than 35 years, he became one of Britain's most respected commentators. Players admired him. Managers respected him. Millions trusted him. But while supporters listened, very few knew what was happening behind the BBC studio doors. Behind the calm voice were painful disappointments, big matches that slipped away, a rivalry that never truly disappeared, decisions that quietly changed his career, and the heartbreaking feeling that one of football's greatest voices was slowly being pushed away from football's biggest stage. Today, Barry Davies is remembered as a broadcasting legend, but behind that legendary voice was a story few people ever knew. This is what really happened to Barry Davies. Subscribe, because legends are not only the men on the pitch. Long before millions recognized his voice, Barry Davies was a young boy growing up in London, born on October 24, 1937. His childhood unfolded during wartime Britain. Football offered hope, but broadcasting was never the plan. Barry studied at Cranbrook School, later attending King's College London, to study dentistry. For a time, his future seemed certain, a quiet life, far away from football. Then fate stepped in. During national service, he joined the British Forces Broadcasting Service. One microphone changed everything. Years later, Barry admitted, "I almost fell into broadcasting by accident. After leaving the army, he became a sports journalist for the Times. There, he learned the value of precision. Every word mattered. Every sentence had a purpose. Soon, television came calling. ITV offered him opportunities, including matches during the 1966 World Cup. His calm delivery, his sharp understanding of football, and his natural authority quickly stood out. Barry always believed the commentator should never become bigger than the game. As he once said, "The pictures are the important thing." He had no idea that one unexpected phone call from the BBC was about to change his life forever. In 1969, everything changed. A sudden illness forced BBC commentator David Coleman to pull out. Barry Davies was called in at the last moment. The match? Crystal Palace against Manchester United. Selhurst Park. Few could have imagined they were listening to the beginning of one of football's greatest broadcasting careers. Barry never tried to overpower the game. He never shouted to create excitement. He let football create its own drama. Supporters noticed. So did the BBC. One big assignment soon became another, then another. World Cups, European Championships, European Cup finals, FA Cup finals, Olympic Games, Wimbledon. For more than 35 years, Barry Davies became one of Britain's most trusted voices. The National Football Museum would later describe him as one of the finest sports commentators of his generation. His philosophy never changed. As Barry once said, "If the pictures tell the story, don't get in their way." It sounded simple, but very few commentators could ever make silence so unforgettable. By the 1980s, Barry Davies was no longer just describing football. He had become part of football itself. Barry Davies wasn't simply watching history, he was giving it a voice. He stood behind the microphone as football produced some of its greatest moments. World Cups, European Championships, European Cup finals, and unforgettable FA Cup ties. Then came Mexico, in 1986, the night Diego Maradona danced through England. Barry's words became part of football history. You have to say, "That's magnificent," but only moments earlier, he had missed the infamous hand of God. Years later, Barry admitted he hadn't seen it clearly, a rare mistake, on one of football's biggest stages. Then came another unforgettable night. Heysel Stadium disaster. Barry arrived expecting a European Cup final. Instead, he found himself describing one of football's darkest tragedies. It was a night no commentator could ever prepare for. Through moments of joy and moments of horror, Barry never changed. He believed the game should always come first. And perhaps that quiet dignity was what made millions trust his voice more than any other. To millions, Barry Davies was already the voice of football, but inside the BBC, another battle was quietly unfolding. There was only room for one commentator to become the face of the biggest occasions. That man was often John Motson. It wasn't hatred. Barry and Motson respected each other, but respect didn't decide who got the final. The BBC did, again and again. The biggest matches went somewhere else. FA Cup finals, World Cup finals, the assignments every commentator dreamed about. Barry rarely complained in public, but the disappointment never disappeared. Years later, he admitted that the imbalance still bothered him. Even Motson would later acknowledge that Barry deserved more of those great occasions. The rivalry made headlines. The comparisons never stopped. One voice was called the sound of the terraces, the other, the voice of the grandstand. Barry never tried to change who he was. He refused to become louder or more dramatic. He believed football didn't need a performer, it needed a commentator. But television was slowly changing, and with it, Barry Davies' place at the very top. Millions heard Barry Davies only on match day. They never saw the pressure behind the voice. Every broadcast allowed no mistakes, no second chances, no retakes. One forgotten name, one missed moment, could follow a commentator for years. Barry carried that pressure every single weekend. Yet the greatest challenge wasn't football. It was watching football change. The game he loved was becoming louder. Television wanted bigger personalities, more opinions, more drama. Barry believed something different. As he once said, the commentator is there to help, not to dominate. He never chased attention, never tried to become the headline. He simply wanted the football to tell its own story. But the broadcasting world was moving in another direction. Slowly, the style that had earned Barry Davies so much respect was becoming a relic of another era. And before long, the BBC would make a decision that changed everything. By the early 2000s, Barry Davies had spent more than 3 decades giving football its voice. He had covered World Cups, European Championships, FA Cup finals, and some of the greatest nights the game had ever seen. Yet behind the scenes, something had changed. The biggest matches were becoming fewer. The biggest occasions were going elsewhere. Barry rarely complained, but he never pretended. It didn't hurt. After 35 years, he made a decision that shocked many supporters. In 2004, Barry Davies walked away from Match of the Day. Not because he had lost his love for football, not because he had lost his voice, but because he believed his role was slowly being reduced. He later admitted he didn't want to stay simply to make up the numbers. For millions of supporters, it felt like the end of an era. One Saturday, the familiar voice was simply gone. Football carried on. New commentators arrived. New styles followed. But for those who had grown up listening to Barry Davies, something had quietly disappeared that could never truly be replaced. Leaving Match of the Day never meant leaving broadcasting behind. Barry Davies continued, doing what he had always done best. He covered Wimbledon, the Olympic Games, hockey, the boat race, and many of Britain's biggest sporting occasions. In 2014, the BBC invited him back. Fittingly, it was at Selhurst Park, the same ground where his Match of the Day journey had begun 45 years earlier. But even then, Barry admitted he felt nervous, not because he had forgotten how to commentate, but because he feared one mistake could change how people remembered him. Away from the cameras, life remained private. He and his wife, Penny, kept largely out of the spotlight. Barry never chased celebrity. He never tried to become famous. He simply lived quietly, while generations of supporters continued remembering the voice that had become part of their childhood. Even in retirement, his love for football never disappeared. But he also admitted the modern game and modern television no longer felt quite the same. The football had changed. The broadcasting had changed, yet Barry Davies never changed with it. Today, Barry Davies lives a quiet life, far away from the commentary box. The microphone has fallen silent, but his voice never truly disappeared. In 2025, he received one of the greatest honours of his career. Barry Davies was inducted into the National Football Museum Hall of Fame. Fittingly, the ceremony took place at Selhurst Park, the very stadium where his match of the day journey had begun, more than 50 years earlier. When told about the honour, Barry admitted he was almost lost for words. A rare moment for the man who had spent a lifetime finding them. Even now, he believes football has changed. The game became louder, the broadcasts became busier, but the memories never faded. Because for millions of supporters, Barry Davies was more than a commentator. He was the voice of Saturday afternoons, the voice of packed terraces, of muddy pitches, of FA Cup magic, of unforgettable World Cups, of football legends who are no longer with us. And for those who grew up listening, hearing Barry Davies is like opening a door to a football world that can never return. Some voices never belong to one generation. They become part of football itself, and Barry Davies will always be one of them. Subscribe, because every great Saturday, every unforgettable match, and every football legend deserves to be remembered.